Yo, Gabriotrundata here. Got a fun one for you today. First and foremost, like to give a huge shout out to Mr. Papa's Penguins for helping me collaborate and get this set up. So basically what I have here is kind of the alpha version, shall we say, of a way to look at my run data for Monster Train. I'm still ironing it out. Right now it doesn't have a lot of my runs in there. Primarily I do a lot of runs on my laptop, kind of off record, but this should be pretty much everything that's on my main PC. I'm looking at year to date right now. I'm looking to add maybe some more filters in the future, but right now it's really just time. And I gotta say, overall what I've found, and you know, granted, take it all with a grain of salt. I don't know if the data's super clean or whatnot. I mean, I know it's not super clean. I'm still kind of working with the data. But for the most part, I've found that my win rate is a lot lower than I actually thought it was. Some things were about what I suspected. Like, I suspected Hellhorn was my best, just sort of overall. Wasn't disappointed by that. About a 73% win rate for primary Hellhorns. And this is also, by the way, looking only at Covenant 25 and no custom games, you know, just a normal Covenant 25 game. But for, you know, for what it's worth, primary Hellhorn 73% win rate, secondary Hellhorn 76% win rate. And I'm looking at year to date. I got another tab here that I'm looking at since March 25th. Maybe that's more interesting, and actually maybe I'll just keep on this one. The reason I'm going from March 25th is that's the first day I picked up the DLC, so you know, might be more what I'm wanting to look for, but got some interesting things here. So overall my win rate's a bit lower since the DLC dropped, especially since my early Wormkin runs really weren't doing well, and you'll see that in a bit here. But anyway, it's definitely interesting. Like, if you compare these, like this is the year-to-date. Stygian Guard was one of my best. Now it's my worst. It's surprising how bad it is for me. I didn't realize I had literally below a 50% win rate with them. Both, you know, both primary and secondary. But it's not a huge surprise to me that they're my lowest. I've been really not loving Stygian. I thought Umbra would actually be my lowest, but I will say I have not been loving Stygian. They went from easily my favorite clan pre-DLC to like the worst post. But anyway, and these win rates, it's so the way you kind of bucket the win rates is interesting. Like right here, I'm just doing it like per month. I have a different way I do it down below, but this is just kind of the first way I looked at it, and you'll notice like Wormkin was pretty bad at the start, like 44% win rate, but it got better as I learned them. Right, they're actually one of my better clans now. And as far as secondary goes, nothing too much other than the fact that Hellhorn just seems to really be a good secondary for me. And then I also did it by total wins, you know, just to see the overall rate. You can see I'm just overall playing. Well, my filter here is only from March 25th, so there's not a whole lot of data here for March, since I'm only getting like the final 6 days or so there. But it is interesting that you know, everything kind of turned out how it did. A lot of losses for the secondary. I was 4-14 for the secondary Wormkin that first month, so got a little bit better there. At least I'm winning more than I'm losing there. But secondary Wormkin seems to be a lot worse for me than primary. It's something I didn't really understand until now, so I'm at least getting some, you know, good data in that regard. 18 and 15, I'm finally better with it, but as you can see, primary much better, 25 wins and 13 losses. And then I also teased it out by exiled and non-exiled. This one was pretty interesting to me. It wasn't surprising to me in some areas and surprising in a little bit of other areas. Like, the one thing that didn't surprise me is the fact that the exiled variants typically perform better than the non-exiled variants. What did surprise me, I guess, was that Awoken exiled didn't actually beat the non-exiled version in primary. Like, I would have thought Wildenton crushed Sentient, but it actually was about even, with Sentient getting a slight edge there. Hellhorned also, I wouldn't have thought. I would have thought that the different. I mean, it's not surprising to me that Shardtail is better, but I would have thought that gap would have been huge. It's not necessarily huge. It's just it's big, but to me, Prince was like the worst champ. So it is interesting to me that Hellhorn primary does so well. I think it's kind of despite the champ personally, but I don't necessarily have a whole lot of data to make that conclusion. Melting was not a big surprise to me that the exiled has a huge gap between non-exiled. It's like Little Fade's 72% win rate, Rector 48% win rate. Pretty crazy, and I'm not surprised at all. I love Exiled Remnant. I fucking hate non-exiled Remnant. I hate Dregs. They're easily my most hated basic card in the game. But that is another topic for another day. And then Stygian, so sad. You'll recall I had a 31 win streak, no reload. It's all, I have a playlist in my channel with Tethys. Went from easily my best champ to easily my worst champ. 35% win rate now. Pretty bad. A lot of that's on me, though. I'm going to have to figure out something to do with Tethys, because that is just abysmal, 35% win rate. But Soul Guard, not too bad. Doesn't surprise me there, because Titan Channel is very strong. I just don't think the other ones are. Now, some weird stuff here. Umbra, similar to the Hellhorn, I would have thought there would have been a big gap here with the Umbra. Still, Primordium's doing better. But, I don't know, I would have thought Penumbra was significantly worse. It's only about, less than 10% of a difference. And then this one also doesn't really surprise me that Echo Right is worse for me than Spine Chief. To me, Spine Chief is the only clear, the only one that I consider the non-exiled version of the champ to be better than the exiled variant. But stats-wise, it is interesting that Wildenton. I always just figured Wildenton was one of the better champs that I had, but I actually have one of my lower win rates with Wildenton, so I'll have to look into that. Now, as far as secondary goes, I don't know if there's a whole lot to glean here. It is funny now. Now you see Hellhorned. Basically, either imps or torch are about the same. And you don't get as big of a difference. Like I said, I don't think... I think that could be evidence that Hellhorn Prince sucks, because... But again, there's only so much sample size here. You can't really draw huge conclusions. It is also interesting that Root Seeds, which we always kind of say is the best... I always say it's like the best basic, other than Primitive Mold, is not performing as well as Restore. And as a secondary. That could just be variance, to be honest. I mean, I haven't played necessarily as many Awoken games. I need to fix this. I was playing around with this. This is like, I was doing the Winrate over time, but the buckets are all fucked up here, so that looks better on this one. Where is it? Yeah, over time. So just also of note, it was interesting how dedicated I was this month to only playing Exiled. Remember, that was the Exiled tournament that I won. I guess practice makes perfect, and actually my win rates were really good here. Other than surprisingly, Primordium was the lowest, but yeah, just kind of was playing much better before the DLC. I'm still kind of ironing out the DLC, as you can see. Because this one goes back to prior to DLC. Late March is when I got the DLC. Anyway, back to this. We can look at the data here too. I just figured, since we're in a Divinity world, I didn't really want games from before Divinity clouding the results here, because as we know, a lot of cards have just completely shifted in value since the DLC dropped. So the way I'm looking at my stats per card is I can sort by any of these, just total win count. The way I'm counting a win is like, is the card in the deck? If it's in multiple times, I don't count it here multiple times, if that makes sense. So like, you'll see here, this should represent basically my overall win rate during the period. So I have 187 wins, 138 losses, win rate of 57%. And what I mean by that is, you'll have 2 deadweights in a deck, but I'm only counting it once here. I hope that makes sense. Like if I go down here, it makes a little more sense. Like I just did the overall stats, so you'll see 187 wins, 138 losses. You have here, you see that deadweight 187, 138. That's about as well as I can explain how I'm counting these. Hopefully that makes sense. Basically, I'm not counting multiples here. I'm saying, did the card exist in the run, and was it a win or was it a loss? Anyway, that long explanation aside, it is interesting to me that Bounding Echoes accounts for more wins, than any of the primary cards. You know what I mean? Like Root Seeds, for example, is my highest, or Echo Break actually is my highest of the basics to show up here in the win count. Very, very interesting. And it's not that crazy, because remember, I've been practicing mainly Wurmkin since the DLC dropped. Like my overall games played on Wurmkin is, significantly more than the other ones. Just looking at the totals here. But anyway, it is interesting to me. So there's a few ways you can look at it. I mean, the way I look at it kind of is, so my overall win rate was 57% during this time period, right? Since the DLC dropped. To me, if I pick a card a lot and it has more, at least around that win rate or more, it shows me I'm probably playing okay in terms of how often I pick that card. Now, if I pick the card a lot and it has, a lower win rate than that, that might be an indicator that I'm overpicking that card. So, really quick, let's remember that number, 57, and let's sort by the lowest win rates here. So, some of these, the numbers are so low you can't glean much, but it is interesting to me that Mollusk Mage actually performed so poorly. Because I was kind of thinking he was pretty good, but actually, who knows? I mean, this 14 runs isn't necessarily a huge amount of runs to go off of, so this could be variance, but it's also a little bit more data to go off than some of these other ones. Like, I don't really care too much about Steel Polyclaw having only 4 runs, but like 14 runs, you're starting to hopefully get the very first inklings of some normalization. So it's interesting to me that I performed so poorly with Mollusk Mage. Same with like Nameless Siren. I mean, apparently I haven't chosen her much since the DLC dropped, at least as a primary unit. But it is interesting that I performed kind of abysmally with her. Big Sludge as well. And granted, by the way, just to reiterate, I don't have my laptop data on here. I know I've definitely won more with Big Sludge than 1 since the DLC dropped, so who knows. But anyway, the Train Steward one, that's maybe more indicative of the fact that if you're going to lose a run early, you probably had Train Steward still in your deck. So, but it could also be indicative that the runs that I am not aggressively removing them as much might result in more losses. But moving down here further, Drag, no surprise there. I told you I fucking hate this goddamn card. 33% win rate with Drags. Screw that card. Screw everything about it. Frozen Lance, that's just more indicative, I think, of I'm doing poorly, apparently, with Tethys, right? Crystallis, that's an interesting one. Because I've always thought this is a pretty good card, but we got some pretty good data to go off here. That's 31 runs sample size, not huge, still a lot of variance. But in the grand scheme of me being able to glean single cards, 31 is probably one of the better sample sizes I have at this range, and it's only a 35% win rate. That could be indicative that it's not that as good of a card as I'm evaluating it to be, you know? And it kind of makes sense. I mean, it is a 2 cost. It only really does 50 damage. It's okay early, but by the time endgame comes around, it's not really doing that much. Flash freeze as well. I mean, I kind of like this card, but maybe in the DLC world it isn't good enough. That's, I guess, my problem with a lot of Stygian, just Stygian in general, is their stats were very... It was very tight how you could play them, but everything just sort of worked out pre-DLC. And post-DLC, nothing really seems to work out all the time. And Flash Freeze and Crystallis might be good examples of that, where their stats just aren't good enough to be warranted in a Divinity world. Let's see, what else we got here? Sharpen, no surprise there, that card sucks. Tethys, poor Tethys. Offering Token, that's an interesting one to me, because Offering Token has always been one of my favorite cards. Hard to deny, though, that in 27 or 37 runs, it's only resulting in a 37% win rate. Might be another one to think about. Cold Kalia. Wickless Baron, I'm not super surprised there. It's not a ton of stats to go off here, but I don't... It hasn't really been performing that well for me in the DLC. It's not fast enough, the stat gain. Not a whole lot here though. Entombed it is weird that Entombed Explosive is doing so poorly. Always thought that's pretty good, but who knows? We're starting to approach, though, levels where it's like, yeah, it's like slightly below 50% here. I don't know. If anything, it just lets me know that the cards aren't necessarily... It'd be hard for me to say that they're like god tier, right? In a general sense. Ice Tornado, no surprise there. I don't think that card's very good anymore. Rector, yeah, I haven't done great with him. Some of these other ones, like Purifying Cleanse, it's like, it's Burnout Extension, it's a weak heal, it's only single target. Not too surprising that it's underwhelming, but it's also not bad, I feel. Like, some of these might just be straight up bad, like Helical Crystallis. But let's sort the other way now, see what we're working with. Now here, we want to look for things that have, you know, high pick rates, but also high win rates. Like, you'll probably see a lot of imp cards here. It does seem like imps are pretty god tier now, aren't they? Like Impolate. If you have any amount of imps, that's 1 energy or 1 ember for usually well over 100 damage. So no surprise there. And important work as well. They even nerfed it. It's still great. I mean, if you have an endless imp, you could spell chain this thing. You get to play it 3 times. Put it on a holdover. It's just amazing. But again, not super high sample size there, with just 7 or 8 runs. Like, that could easily have a few where they don't work out right. And they're very specific cards, right? You're not adding them unless they're god tier in your deck, right? But then the other ones, like Wildwood Tome, I'm surprised at just how well it did. 16-1 is pretty insane. But this is one where it's not really that specific to a deck, right? Like, this seems to just generally be a good pickup most of the time. I may target it even more than I do. Who knows? I mean, it's a super upgrade at a Merchant, a Steel, right? That's one of the expensive upgrades is quickness, and to be able to, at 1 energy with no downside, just apply it is a pretty powerful play. Adaptive also, it's not in a general sense good, I would say, but when it is good, it is good. And as you can see, 15-1 there. Transcendent, no surprise there. It's god tier even after the nerf. Last Stand also, it's similar to Adaptive. You're only adding it when it makes sense, but if you add it... Because here's a problem with a lot of these stats. It's like, I could easily add Adaptive and Last Stand more often than I should, and then these stats would look bad, right? is that really... So it's not saying that necessarily the card is bad, but it's more indicative of like making a judgment call, like, am I adding this card too much, right? So when I think back to like Helical Chrysalis, when I looked at it, it's like maybe the card's not bad, but I seem to be just sort of snap picking it more often than I should, is probably the evaluation I should make there. Because there's obviously some situations where it should be there, but I'm potentially just adding it too much. And then, yeah, Tiresome Climb is just god tier. I mean, in general, Daze now in the Divinity world is quite nice. Pyre Chomper, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's a lot to go over here. Soulcrushing Guilt, that's another one. Just Daze is amazing. 83% win rate on a very high pick rate. I mean, 42. Hard to deny that this card isn't amazing, right? With 42 games played with it. And an 83% win rate, I'd say that's approaching normalization. That's a card that's just almost always good to add. Inferno, also very good. Branding right, I don't know. I think there's some variance going there. I don't think it's necessarily a hugely good. But Ritual Battle, that's another one that I feel is almost always good. Pretty good win rate. Etchings is pretty specific, but if the deck makes sense, it's good. So, yeah, I don't know. Interesting, I guess, to see the very high pick rate, very high win rate cards. You know, Tiresome Climb, I'd say, is hitting that. Like, I'm less interested in the super situational cards, like Adaptive Mutation. I'm more interested in, like, Tiresome Climb. Like, seems to be good in almost every situation. Soulcrushing Guilt seems to be good in every situation. Ritual Battle seems to be good in almost every situation. And then even at, you know, we're looking at insane win rates, but even as you go lower, like Rail Spike, obviously we know that's almost good in every situation. Wingmaker is good in every situation. Hidden Passage, I would say in most situations it's pretty good. I mean, we've always known that though, right? Forced Contamination, that's the one that applies melee weakness, also pretty much every situation good. Revenge of the Damned, that's an interesting one. I may undervalue this card. That's just the one that strikes a unit twice and it has to extract to play it, but you can gain 2 echoes. I mean, I guess it's pretty good. Returned Soul, I always knew this was a good card. 77, you know, on 31 games played, 70% win rate, pretty good. Fledgling Imp, as we said, all the imps are amazing now. That's funny. Queen's Impling and Torch have the same exact. Trap Shoot, Unearthed Remains, that's an interesting one. From a Mold, no surprises there on that basic. Horned Warrior, quite nice. Hosting Kin, also just kind of pretty good. Broken Memories as well. But now we're getting to stuff that's only slightly above my win rate, right? Like Spine Chief's obviously pretty good for me. Old Magic seems to show up a ton, isn't that? I know that at a certain point they lowered the rate of it, but it is interesting that I've had 62 runs since the DLC dropped that I've gotten Old Magic in. That's pretty wild. Let's go back to the lower win rate ones again. And in fact, actually, I'm just going to sort by loss count, maybe. That might even be easier, so... Yeah, maybe that's not easier. Let's just go back to here. Just want to make sure there's not any other good ones to glean out here. Let's go back to the first page. And even, you know, you notice a lot of Stygian cards. This could also just be me playing bad with Stygian, and still, you know, I might still be choosing fine cards. It's just that I'm playing bad with Stygian, right? You see a lot of the commons here, just almost all the commons. I guess I'm not seeing Crit Builder. Crit Builder seems to be quite good now. I mean, it was always pretty good, but with all the ways to add just massive amounts of spell damage, it's become pretty good. I wonder... Yeah, see, Crit Builder, I pick it a lot, and it's actually 53%. And if you think about my overall Stygian Winrate and how low it is, this is actually a good sign that Crypt Builder is very good. And maybe I should really just target Crypt Builder much more so than basically all the other Stygian cards. Frenzied Swarm also doing quite nice. Anyway, though, I don't know how much more I need to really dig into these card stats. There's only so much you can get from them, right? Draft. I would have thought draft did better than 50%. Yeah, whatever. And then I've got the champ paths here, so there's so many different iterations that it's hard to really get sample sizes on many of them, but I have a few here like that I tend to run a lot, right? So like Corruptor and Repeater are obviously my favorite paths for both of these, though Decayer is quickly catching up to Corruptor, and then obviously like Firelight, Little Fade. Yeah, you can see these, other than Penumbra Architect might be taking a little bit too much, but again, 10 runs, can you really tell a whole lot there? But I can at least see I'm doing pretty well with these that I tend to favor, right? Like Firelight, Repeater, Corruptor, Decayer, they all seem to be performing pretty well. However, you know, on the lost ones, no surprise here. I made this evaluation maybe a few weeks ago that I don't think Martial Lord's very good, even though I found it pretty fun. I have a lot of losses and not a whole lot of wins to my name with Martial Lord, and I suspect when my laptop data comes in, hopefully I can set that up this week. I think it'll be even worse. I remember specifically losing a lot of Martial Lord games on that laptop. But the rest of these, the sample sizes are just so low. I mean, I guess 5 on the Corruptor 2 is interesting, because that's another thing. I should probably find a different way to look at this data, because it's like, I have 5 losses on Corruptor 2, so it's like the win rate here doesn't mean much, right? With how I've bucketed this, if you go back, like I had 15 wins and 3 losses with Corruptor 3, but that doesn't account for the ones that I lose where I didn't get to Corruptor 3, right? Where I just had like Corruptor 2, for example. Firelight, for example, is the same. Like, once you get to Firelight 3, pretty hard to lose, but what about Firelight like 2 and 1, which 1 especially can be actually kind of weak. Like, let's see how many I've lost at Firelight 1. I'm sorting by name just so I can find it. Let's sort the other way on name. So like Firelight 1, for example, 0-1, Firelight 2, 0-2, but then 9-0. So really it's 9-3 if you think about it for what I'd actually want to find here. But I don't know a good way right now how to do that. I'll figure it out, though. I know I will. And this was overall win rate that I did a different way than above. I tried to do like a running total. So like it'll look at whatever time range you're at, take your first day or whatever. So you can see my progression with Wormkin has been pretty good. Like, I started off pretty bad. Like, the first day I played, I had 16% win rate. And then this is just cumulative over time. As in, like, this number here, 62, still takes into account all the data from before. So I'm getting a lot better with Wormkin, but unfortunately other clans I'm getting a bit worse with, like Stygian, for example, needs some work. Melting as well needs some work, but you know, in general, just whatever's low here needs work. Apparently, I need some work with Awoken too. And then, yeah, this is just the total numbers over the time range for each of these. The total was 57%, and most of that comes actually from Stygian Guard, and then Awoken and Melton also perform less than it. But every other clan is above that, so seems I'm doing okay, at least primary, with Hellhorn, Wormkin, and Umbra. But I need to step up my game with particularly Burnout Rector. I know that, as you can see, my Icarus is fine. It's my Burnout Rector, or not Burnout, just Rector in general needs help, and Awoken, both sides could use some work, and then Tethys really needs some work. And then just to show the difference, so we're looking since then. Let's look before that same date. So that was the 25th of March that all that dropped. My music's gone. Whatever. This video will be done soon, so I'm not gonna bother. But anyway, you'll see. I had kind of started to get a bit better, and I must have lost some runs back then. But my kind of peak play here was January and February of 2021. I was actually winning every game with a few of these. I think I did my 31 game Stygian streak in January, if I remember correctly. It was one of those months. But and then February was my exiled only practice. So you'll see. I kind of need to get back to the win rates I was at here. I'm more in line with how I was leading up to there, kind of the September to December era, shall we say. And then total wins. This is you can kind of see my progression over the time in this game. Like I kind of learned Covenant 25 with Melting Remnant, and then maybe October is when I did all the Stygian. I can't remember, but anyway, I think maybe January I did a ton of, was it imp builds? I think it was. Anyway. Oh yeah, this was definitely, so actually October I think was really when I was hammering the melting and awoken. No, never mind. I was doing both these with awoken secondary. That's why awoken is so high there. But I think even, yeah, melting remnant and awoken was what I kind of learned the game on in July, it looked like. What else am I looking for here? Oh yeah, and just the difference, I guess, in the win rates in the cards. So like I mean, Deranged Brute's still good. I'm trying to think of like some good examples. Ice Storm, I think, is a good one. You'll notice it didn't have a particularly stellar win rate in when I looked at Divinity till now. I thought it was a pretty amazing card pre-DLC. It's still okay now, but these random target cards just suck in the Divinity fight. There's 5 enemies on most floors, and you just can't rely on a card like Ice Storm to do much for you there. So you can see cards like that just kind of lose value. Some of them remain amazing though, like Impelate still, if it made sense to add it, it's amazing in the deck. Reinforce, that's an interesting one. Nameless Siren though, remember how bad I was doing with Nameless Siren before? Well, it's actually, other than Deranged Brute, and I guess Dante is my highest win rate banner unit, and it also accounts for 89 wins, which is a lot, right? As far as win rates go, it's the first one with a pretty high amount of wins, and that's 77. I can't talk at that 78% win rate level. And then Frenzied Swarm, also just amazing. Yeah, Transcendent, great, but not as insane as it is in the Divinity, I feel, because here's the thing, I think Transcendent's a lot better now because you can infuse it with shit. So it doesn't even really need any other imps other than itself, as long as you can just take a basic Queen's Impling and infuse it with it, and that's enough to carry the game. Or if you didn't have Queen's Impling, just any other imp usually will do, like a Fledgling Imp or a Welder Helper, any of those are going to do. You're going to just keep compounding that over and over. What else we got? Soul Guard was pretty good. Some of these you see some consistent ones, like Pyrogrow was high in both. Interesting that Glacial Seal did so good back then. Unnamed Tome, 114 wins. Wow, 148 on Preserved Thorns. That doesn't surprise me though, because I was hammering all those incant decks. Invigorating Solutions, similar story. Root Seeds. And then similarly, we can see some cards that, we still have the whole Train Steward thing, but I wonder if there's a good example here of like a card that didn't really do good for me that I now am pretty good with. Steelworker's probably one of them, even though I'm generally infusing it. We did notice Steelworker was in some of my higher win rate cards in the Divinity. But back here it was pretty bad, 36% win rate. Molten Encasement as well. I mean, I have to imagine in the new one. Let's actually check that. Well, whatever. I know that it was Molten Encasement was higher, but it is interesting that it was only like 39% for me prior. Although Rector apparently I sucked with. Granted, I have like everything in this time range. You know, I have some pretty bad periods of play in here. A lot of learning being done in those early months. Entombed Explosive about the same, interestingly enough. Let's see. I want to go back to the ones that had a lot of high. Let's go with the ones with just high total wins. Like Molded, I used to choose a lot. I don't choose it as much anymore. Crystallis, here's a great example. Look at that. Remember how bad it was? Like 38% win rate? It was 65 for me prior. Probably even higher if I go to like the really good period of time that I was playing Stygian. But anyway, like, yeah, pretty crazy that Helical Crystallis is a 65% win rate prior to the DLC. Wildwood Sap as well. Remember, Regen was very good prior to the DLC. It's not so good anymore. Siren of the Sea. Crypt Builder seems to actually have been good at both points, so Crypt Builder's just always been good. It probably flew under my radar to a certain extent. Flash Freeze, there's another one like Chrysalis, which has not been performing well for me post-DLC, but it performed quite well for me prior. See, I wonder here, because we remember my data before, Crypt Builder was doing well. It was picked a lot. So my data in the Divinity period, it was doing well, it was picked a lot, but Chrysalis was picked a lot, not doing well. Flash Freeze was picked a lot, not doing well. So when I compare to the prior data where there's really not a whole lot of difference, like Chrysalis, Builder, Freeze, they're all picked about the same rate and winning at a high rate. That kind of tells me that maybe Chrysalis and Flash Freeze just aren't that good anymore, to be quite honest. Like, I'll have to think about that and really maybe shy away from picking those cards and see if my game improves. But anyway, that's kind of mainly a lot of the stuff I'm looking to get from this data. I'm going to do a big follow-up video at some point where I'm going to flesh out this data, get my laptop data in, and I'm going to get some better ways to look at it, and maybe hopefully some other things that I can glean. There's other bits of data in here that I'm not really looking at yet. This is just kind of my first go at it, like I said. Ice Tornado is another one, by the way. Ice Tornado used to be pretty good. Now it kind of sucks. Drag always sucked. 40%. Fuck that card. Anyway, let me know if this was interesting. If there's any particular insights you'd be interested in finding, just leave me a comment, and I can just look it up on my own time and respond. Or alternatively, if you have your own run data that you want to get ran through this, just let me know. I can do that too. Yeah. Offering Token, by the way, again, it's performing pretty well prior to the DLC, but post DLC, my win rate's pretty bad with it. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace. MVP for this episode goes to Mr. Papo's Penguins. You would have none of this. Like no names of any of these cards. You just wouldn't have anything if it weren't for him. He helped me several steps along the way. So shout out to him again. Yeah, until next time, peace.